On the mournful morning of August 12th, 1843, a woman's scream tore through the hush of Magnolia Shade Plantation, deep in the moss-draped low country of South Carolina. What Eliza Hawthorne beheld in her husband's private quarters that dawn would birth a scandal so black that newspapers choked on the ink for 60 long years. Within 3 days, more than 300 souls crowded into Beaufort's shadowed square to behold a punishment so savage that the memory branded itself upon their graves. The county locked every paper away until 1923, and when dusty hands finally cracked the seals, they found the truth far bleaker than any whispered ghost story. This was not mere betrayal. It was the utter ruination of a man's soul, orchestrated by the one soul who knew precisely how to turn a whole town's wrath into a weapon. Before we drift deeper into the tale of Magnolia Shade Plantation and the scandal that shattered the Hawthorne name, I need you to do something. If this story already crawls under your skin like damp rot, subscribe now. We unearth the blackest truths America tried to bury. Tell me in the comments what state you're hearing this from. Are you near where this nightmare took root? Hit subscribe, child, because what comes next is far worse. Now, let me carry you back to 1843, to a world where reputation was breath itself, and losing it meant losing your very being. Beaufort, South Carolina, in the early 1840s, was built on contradictions. Spanish moss hung from ancient live oaks like funeral veils, lovely and smothering. The air tasted of salt marsh and magnolia bloom, sweetness that could not hide the rot beneath. This was where fortunes rose from fields tilled by enslaved hands, where white-columned mansions vied for the grandest show of wealth and dominion. The Hawthorne family sat at the pinnacle of this society. Elias Hawthorne, 35 years of age in 1843, had inherited Magnolia Shade Plantation from his father 7 years prior. 3,000 acres of prime earth, a Greek Revival mansion finished in 1838, crystal chandeliers shipped from France, heart pine floors joined so tight the seams vanished. Elias was every inch the South Carolina gentleman, tall, raven-haired, broad-shouldered from years of riding. He dressed without flaw, spoke with the slow cadence of old blood, sat on the town council, served as church deacon. He was known as a fair master, which in those days meant he did not whip his slaves as often as his neighbors. But Elias Hawthorne harbored a secret that would burn everything to cinders. Eliza Hawthorne, born Eliza Pennington, had wed Elias in 1837. She hailed from Charleston, wealth to rival the Hawthornes. The marriage had been arranged, as most were, a union forged to bind two dynasties. She was beautiful in the way Southern society demanded, skin pale as moonlight, shielded from sun, dark hair coiled perfect, waist cinched to fashionable narrowness. She had been schooled at Charleston's finest academy, trained in French, piano, watercolors, and the quiet art of running a household while seeming to do nothing. Their wedding had been the social triumph of the season. 400 guests at St. Michael's Church. Everyone declared they made a perfect pair. Everyone swore their children would be beautiful. But 6 years in, there were no children. This was murmured in parlors, always with that blend of pity and judgment society saved for women who failed their chief calling. Eliza felt the weight of those whispers. She saw Elias's mother's veiled disappointment. She knew her worth diminished with every barren year. What Eliza did not fully grasp was why there were no children. Why Elias came to her bed so seldom, why he seemed far away, his mind elsewhere, even when his body lay beside her. The truth lived in the quarters behind the great house. The truth had names: Malachi, Silas, and Darius. Malachi was 24, son of the plantation's head cook. light-skinned with features that hinted at blood no one spoke of aloud. He had served in the main house since 15, first as footman, then as Elias's personal valet. He was quick, able to foresee needs before they were voiced, gliding through rooms like a shadow. Silas was 26, working the stables, darker than Malachi, muscled from toil, with hands equally deft with horses and leather. He carried quiet dignity, an inner strength slavery could not wholly crush. Elias had noticed him 3 years earlier, begun finding reasons to linger in the stables. Darius was 21, a house carpenter skilled at fine woodwork the plantation demanded. He was slight, almost fragile, with long fingers and an artist's eye. He rarely spoke, his voice soft and careful when he did. He had learned early that invisibility meant survival. Elias had been careful, so very careful. He met them apart, never together, always late at night in the east wing where Eliza never wandered. That wing was supposedly under repair, shuttered, unused. Elias had crafted a sanctuary there, a room with its own garden entrance, simple yet comfortable furnishings, a large bed, heavy curtains, a lock, oil lamps burning low and forgiven. For 3 years this arrangement endured. Elias kept his public mask flawless. Church every Sunday, business ruthless and efficient, smiles at his wife across candlelit tables, and late at night, while Eliza slept in her separate chamber as was proper, Elias slipped down the servant stairs, crossed moonlit gardens to the east wing where one or more of the 3 men would be waiting. These men had no choice. They were property. When their master summoned them, they came. Whether they felt desire, fear, resignation, or tangled knots of all 3, their feelings mattered not. Survival demanded obedience. Refusal meant punishment, sale, separation from kin. So they came, when called, kept silent, told themselves they were at least spared the field work that broke other men's bodies, at least had slightly better food, slightly better clothes, small mercies Elias granted in exchange for their silence and their bodies. But secrets, no matter how tightly locked, bleed out in time. In a house where dozens of enslaved souls moved through shadows, where wives lay awake listening to creaking floorboards, where jealousies and resentment simmered beneath every breath, a secret this vast could only stay buried so long. Eliza had noticed things, small things at first. Elias always locking the east wing door. Him seeming energized certain mornings, almost cheerful after weeks of distant gloom. Malachi moving through the house with particular tension, eyes never quite meeting hers. Silas always in the garden late at night when he should be in the quarters. Darius sometimes with bruises on his neck, marks that looked like fingers, like lips. She had noticed and pushed these observations away because the alternative was unthinkable. No Southern gentleman would do such things. Impossible, unnatural, against God and nature and every law of civilized society. But Eliza was no fool. She had been raised in a world where women learned to watch, to read subtle signs men thought they hid. 6 years as wife to an increasingly distant husband, enduring pitying glances and whispered conversations, feeling her worth diminish with each childless year, and slowly, like water seeping through foundation cracks, truth had begun penetrating her carefully kept denial. On the night of August 11th, 1843, Eliza made a decision. She would know the truth. Whatever it was, however terrible, she would see it with her own eyes. Eliza waited until the house was dark and still. She heard Elias's footsteps in the hallway, heard him descend the servants' stairs. She gave him 10 minutes, enough time to reach the east wing, to settle in, to believe himself safe. Then she rose from her bed, wrapped a dark shawl around her white nightgown, and followed. The garden was lit only by quarter moon and faint glow from slave quarters. Eliza moved careful, bare feet silent on brick paths. She could hear cicadas in the trees, distant river sounds, her own heart pounding so hard she thought it might wake the entire plantation.
She reached the east wing. The side door was slightly ajar. Light flickered from within, casting shifting shadows. Elijah approached slow.
Breath shallow, hands trembling. She looked through the gap in the door. The room was larger than expected, furnished with care that made clear this was no temporary arrangement. The bed dominated the space, covered in fine linens Eliza recognized as missing from household inventory. Oil lamps cast warm light across the scene. Elias was on the bed, unclothed, his body intertwined with 3 others. Malachi, Silas, and Darius were with him, moving together in ways that left no doubt about what was happening. The sounds, the intimacy, the obvious familiarity of their movements spoke of long practice, comfortable relationship. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream rising in her throat. She stood frozen, unable to look away, unable to process what she was seeing. Her husband, the respectable planter, church deacon, pillar of society, engaged in acts that were not only illegal, but considered the deepest possible depravity. In 1843 South Carolina, what Eliza witnessed was a crime punishable by death. Not just for Elias, but for Malachi, Silas, and Darius as well. The law made no distinction, showed no mercy. The act itself was called sodomy, though that word was rarely spoken aloud. It was considered abomination, sin so terrible that even discussing it could corrupt decent folk. Eliza watched perhaps 30 seconds, though it felt like eternity. She watched Elias kiss Malachi with tenderness she had never known in their marriage. She watched Silas's hands move across Elias's back with obvious familiarity. She watched Darius whisper something that made Elias laugh, genuine, unguarded laugh she had not heard in years. In that moment, watching her husband show more authentic emotion and desire with 3 enslaved men than he had ever shown with her, Eliza felt something cold and hard crystallize in her chest. Not just betrayal, though that was there. Not just humiliation, though she felt that too. What she felt was rage, pure, focused, calculating rage. She had given this man 6 years of her life, endured whispers and judgment, diminished herself, trying to be the perfect wife. And all the while he had been here in this room with these men, living his true life, while she lived a lie. Eliza backed away from the door, mind already racing. She returned to the house, climbed stairs to her room, sat at her writing desk. Her hands were steady now, breathing calm. She lit a candle and pulled out paper. She began to write 3 letters, one to Elias's mother, one to Sheriff Clarence Dunwoody, one to Elias himself. In each, she described what she had witnessed, sparing no necessary detail to convey the full horror. She sealed all 3 letters, then walked to Elias's door and slid his letter underneath. She returned to her room and lay in bed, fully dressed, waiting for sunrise. Elias found the letter at dawn. He picked it up, broke the seal, read. Color drained from his face. Hands began shaking. He read 3 times as if repetition might change the words. Eliza had seen him. She knew everything, and she had already written to the sheriff and his mother. Elias's first instinct was panic. Run, saddle a horse, ride north, disappear. But where would he go? He was a plantation owner whose entire identity was tied to this land. He had no skills beyond managing enslaved labor and maintaining social position. Without Magnolia Shade, without the Hawthorne name, he was nothing. His second instinct was denial. Perhaps he could convince Eliza she misunderstood. But even as these thoughts formed, he knew they were desperate and foolish.
Eliza had described details proven beyond doubt. She had witnessed exactly what she claimed. His third instinct was rage. How dare she threaten him? But that rage died quick, because Elias knew the truth. He had betrayed her, lived a lie, and in the rigid moral universe of antebellum South, what he had done was unforgivable. He walked to Eliza's bedroom and knocked. No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. He knocked again, harder.
Eliza, we must talk, please. Her voice came from behind the door, calm and cold. There is nothing to discuss, Elias. The letters have been sent. Sheriff Dunwoody will arrive within the hour. Your mother shortly after. I suggest you use whatever time remains to make peace with God, since you will have no peace in this world. Elias pressed his forehead against the door. Please, Eliza, I can explain. Explain how you have spent 3 years defiling yourself and your slaves. Explain how you have made mockery of our marriage and our name. There is no explanation that matters, Elias. You are a sodomite. That is what you are. That is all you are, and everyone will know it by sunset. Sheriff Dunwoody arrived at 7:30 with 2 deputies. Eliza met them at the door, still in nightclothes over. She invited them inside, offered coffee, explained the situation with calm, measured tone of woman reporting a property dispute. The sheriff was large, 60 years old, gray beard, eyes that had seen every shade of human wickedness. He had known Elias since Elias was a boy, attended the wedding, been guest at Christmas parties. As he listened to Eliza describe what she witnessed, as he read her detailed account, his face darkened with betrayal, mixed with disgust, mixed with cold determination of a man who knew exactly what the law required. These are serious charges, Mrs. Hawthorne, the most serious a man can face in this state. I am aware, Sheriff, which is why I sent for you immediately. My husband is in his study. The 3 slaves he was with are in the quarters. I want them all arrested. I want this handled according to the full extent of the law. The sheriff nodded slow. Where did this incident occur? The East Wing. There is a room there furnished for this purpose. You will find everything exactly as I described. Sheriff Dunwoody motioned to his deputies. They moved through the house with Eliza leading. She showed them the East Wing, the side door, the room itself. The bed was still unmade, lamps still burning low. Evidence of what occurred was everywhere, impossible to deny. The sheriff's jaw tightened.
This was violation, not just a law, but of an entire social order. Elias Hawthorne was one of the wealthiest men in the county, respected citizen, community leader. And now he would have to be destroyed, publicly and completely, because the alternative was to let such behavior stand unpunished, which would shake the very foundations of their society. Arrest Mr. Hawthorne, the sheriff told his deputies. Bring him to town jail, then go to quarters and arrest the 3 slaves, Malachi, Silas, and Darius. The deputies moved to the study. Elias did not resist. He stood when they entered, set down his glass, held out wrists for shackles. His face was blank, empty of expression. He looked at Eliza once as they led him past her in the hallway. She met his gaze without flinching. I hope you understand what you have done, Elias said quiet. This will destroy you as much as it destroys me. Eliza smiled, a cold, terrible smile. I know exactly what I have done. I have revealed you for what you are. I will survive this, Elias. I will return to Charleston, to my family. I will be the wronged wife, the innocent victim of your depravity. But you will be nothing, just a name people whisper about, a cautionary tale, a warning about consequences of unnatural vice. Elias said nothing more. Deputies led him outside to a waiting wagon. Within minutes, he was on his way to Beaufort Town Jail, shackled like common criminal. His fall of grace so sudden and complete, it seemed almost unreal. Malachi, Silas, and Darius were taken from quarters in chains. Their families watched in silent horror, understanding their loved ones were caught in something that would likely end in death. In 1843, South Carolina, slaves had no legal defense against such charges. If a white man claimed they participated in sodomy, their guilt was assumed. By noon, all 4 men were locked in separate cells. By evening, everyone in Beaufort knew. The news spread like wildfire, whispered in shops and parlors, discussed in horrified tones over dinners, debated in taverns. Elias Hawthorne, the respectable planter, was a sodomite, caught in the act with 3 male slaves. His wife had discovered him and reported him to law. The scandal was so enormous it dwarfed every other topic. Nothing else mattered except this one terrible revelation.
The week between Elias's arrest and his trial felt suspended in time, as if all Beaufort was holding its breath. The town had never known scandal of this magnitude. Murder. They had seen theft, adultery, drunkenness, violence. All the usual sins had passed through the courthouse. But this was different. This touched something deeper and more terrifying, a violation so profound it threatened the very order of their world. Judge Harlan Middleton presided over Beaufort County's legal proceedings. 68 years old, War of 1812 veteran, known for strict law interpretation and unwavering commitment to maintaining social order. When he received documents related to Elias's arrest, he sat in chambers for over an hour, reading and rereading charges. He had known Elias since childhood, signed the marriage license, approved loans for Magnolia Shade expansion. Now he was being asked to preside over Elias's destruction. The law was clear. South Carolina statutes defined sodomy as the abominable crime against nature, prescribing punishment of either death or such lesser penalty as court deemed appropriate, though statute strongly implied death was preferred. No ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The act itself, if proven, demanded harshest consequences, but Judge Middleton faced complications. Elias was white, wealthy, from founding family. Malachi, Silas, and Darius were enslaved. Property, legally worth perhaps $800 each. Law theoretically applied equally, but in practice, everyone knew enslaved people would be punished more severely and quickly. The question was how to handle Elias without creating precedent that might threaten other wealthy white men with secrets they preferred hidden. On August 15th, Judge Middleton called private meeting. Present were Sheriff Dunwoody, County Prosecutor Richard Fellows, 3 prominent citizens, including Mayor and 2 church deacons. Eliza was not invited, nor was anyone representing Elias. Gentlemen, the judge began, we face situation requiring both justice and discretion. Charges against Mr. Hawthorne are supported by unimpeachable evidence. His wife witnessed the crime directly. Physical evidence corroborates testimony. If this were any other man, any man of lesser standing, we would proceed directly to conviction and sentencing without hesitation. But it is not any other man. Mayor Thomas Pritchard interjected. It is Elias Hawthorne. His family has been part of this community 3 generations. His plantation employs hundreds directly or indirectly.
If we execute him, what happens to his slaves, his property, the debts he owes, and debts owed to him? Prosecutor Fellows, thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, shook his head firm. With respect, Mayor, we cannot allow wealth or status considerations to interfere with justice. If we treat Mr. Hawthorne differently than we would treat a poor farmer or shopkeeper, we undermine entire foundation of law. Crime is same, regardless of who commits it. Fellows is right. Sheriff Dunwoody added, I have the man in my jail. 3 slaves who participated. If we let any escape justice, what message does that send that wealthy can do whatever they wish? That law only applies to common folk? Reverend Samuel Cartwright spoke, voice grave with moral certainty. This is not merely legal matter, gentlemen. It is a spiritual crisis. What Mr. Hawthorne has done is abomination before God. It corrupts natural order, threatens moral foundation of our society. If we show mercy, soften punishment, we suggest such behavior is somehow forgivable. We cannot do that. We must not. Judge Middleton nodded slow. Then let me propose a course of action. We will hold a trial, present evidence. Given circumstances, conviction is certain, but I will use discretion in sentencing. Mr. Hawthorne will not be executed. The room erupted in objections, several men speaking at once. Judge raised hand for silence. Hear me out. Death would be mercy for a man in his position. Quick end, closed coffin, private burial. His family could mourn and move on. No, what I propose is worse than death. Public punishment of such severity that Elias Hawthorne will wish we had hanged him. Destroy not just his body, but his soul, his reputation, his very identity. Make entire community witness it, so everyone understands exactly what happens to men who commit this crime. What form would this punishment take? The prosecutor asked.
Judge Middleton's expression was cold. Calculating the pillory and whipping post in town square, but not for an hour or two, for 3 full days. Locked in pillory from dawn to dusk, exposed to the elements, insects, jeers, and curses of anyone who passes, and at noon each day, public whipping, not enough to kill him, but enough to scar permanently, enough to ensure for rest of his life he carries marks of shame on his body. Room fell silent. Even men most insistent on harsh punishment seemed taken aback by brutality of the proposal. And the slaves, Reverend Cartwright asked quiet. They will be hanged, Judge said without hesitation. They are property who corrupted their master. They seduced him into depravity. They will serve as example of what happens when slaves step beyond their place. Executions will precede Mr. Hawthorne's punishment by 1 day, so he knows what his actions have cost them. Sheriff Dunwoody frowned. That is not just, Your Honor. By all accounts, Hawthorne initiated these relationships. Slaves had no choice, could not refuse their master. Justice and necessity are not always aligned, Sheriff Law. Requires all participants in sodomy be punished. More importantly, white citizens need to see natural order restored. White men may fall, but they fall from great height. Slaves who participate in such acts must be eliminated entirely. It is harsh, but only way to maintain control. Men exchanged glances. Slow, reluctant, they nodded agreement. Solution satisfied no one completely, but balanced competing demands of law, social hierarchy, and the need to make an example that would resonate far beyond Beaufort. But Judge Middleton had not factored in Eliza Hawthorne. She was not present, but she had sources. One of the judge's clerks, young Benjamin Porter, courting Eliza's cousin, overheard conversation and repeated it to his fiancée, who immediately sent word to Eliza. When Eliza learned the plan, she was not satisfied. She had wanted Elias destroyed, but had not considered Malachi, Silas, and Darius would be executed. Despite everything, despite her rage, she understood these 3 men had been trapped in an impossible situation. They were property, had no choice but to obey the master's commands. To execute them for Elias's depravity seemed like a miscarriage of justice, even by twisted standards of slave society. But Eliza also understood something else. If Malachi, Silas, and Darius died before Elias's public punishment, if they were hanged and buried before a town witnessed Elias's humiliation, then Elias would become a martyr of sorts. People would whisper he had loved his slaves, sacrificed himself for them, that there was something tragic and romantic about his fall. Eliza could not allow that narrative. She sent word to Judge Middleton, requesting private meeting. He agreed, curious about what woman at Scandal Center could possibly want. They met in his chambers 2 days before trial. Eliza arrived, dressed in full mourning black, though no one had died. Deliberate choice, visual representation of death, of her marriage, her hopes, her future. She sat across from Judge with perfect posture, hands folded, expression calm. Your Honor, I have heard of your intended sentence for my husband and the 3 slaves involved in his crime. Judge raised an eyebrow. That was private discussion, Mrs. Hawthorne. How did you come to know of it in this town size? Your Honor, very little remains private long, but I am not here to question your authority or judgment. I am here to make a request. Speak then. I request punishment of all 4 men occur simultaneously, that Malachi, Silas, and Darius not be hanged separately, but be present during Elias's 3 days in pillory and whipping, that they be forced to watch what becomes of the man who used them, and that Elias be forced to watch their executions on final day after his punishment is complete. Judge Middleton leaned back, studying her. That is remarkably cruel, Mrs. Hawthorne, even for wronged wife. My husband showed me no mercy, Your Honor, showed our marriage no respect, showed God's law no reverence. Why should I show him mercy now? Why should he be granted the dignity of being punished alone where he can imagine himself victim? Let him see what his desires have caused. Let him watch those 3 men die knowing his actions brought them to the gallows. Let entire towns see complete picture of his depravity and its consequences. Judge Middleton was silent for a long moment, then nodded slow. Your request is granted. I will modify sentence accordingly. Trial will proceed in 3 days. Punishment will begin day after verdict. It will be exactly as you described. Eliza stood, smoothed her black skirts, offered Judge a small, cold smile. Thank you, Your Honor. Justice should be complete. Entire story should be told. Nothing should be hidden.
The trial began August 18th, 1843. Courtroom packed beyond capacity. People stood in aisles, crowded doorways, pressed against windows, trying to hear every word. This was not just trial. It was social event of decade, spectacle that would be discussed and debated for years. Elias was brought in wearing shackles. He had not been allowed to change clothes since arrest. Once fine shirt stained and wrinkled, face gaunt, eyes hollow. He looked like man who had already died inside, going through the motions of living because he had no other choice. Malachi, Silas, and Darius were brought separately, also in chains, made to stand in courtroom corner, guarded by armed deputies. Their faces showed different emotions. Malachi looked resigned, almost peaceful, as if he had accepted what was coming. Silas's jaw was set, eyes burning with quiet rage. Darius was trembling, tears running silently down face. Judge Middleton took his seat. Prosecutor arose and presented charges. Then Eliza was called to testify. She walked to witness stand with head held high, wore dark gray now, still mourning colors, but slightly less severe. Placed hand on Bible, swore to tell the truth. Then, in clear, steady voice, described in exact detail what she had witnessed morning of August 12th. The courtroom was utterly silent as she spoke. Men shifted uncomfortable. Women fanned themselves, whether from heat or shock, impossible to say. Every word Eliza uttered was like hammer blow, destroying Elias's reputation, dignity, very humanity. When she finished, the prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Hawthorne, is there any possibility you misunderstood what you saw?" Eliza's eyes narrowed.
My husband has been engaging in this behavior for at least 3 years, Mr. Crawford. That is not temporary insanity. That is deliberate choice. That is who he is. Crawford tried few more questions, but each only made Elias's situation worse. Finally sat down, defeated, no defense to be made. Evidence overwhelming, witness unshakable. Elias was asked if he wished to testify. He shook his head. What could he possibly say? Truth was undeniable. Malachi, Silas, and Darius were not allowed to testify. Slaves could not give evidence in court except in limited circumstances, and this was not one. Their guilt was assumed based on Elias's testimony and physical evidence. They had no voice, no chance to explain or defend, simply stood in corner, waiting for the inevitable verdict. Judge Middleton addressed jury, though everyone knew their decision was predetermined. Gentlemen of jury, you have heard testimony, seen evidence. The law is clear on this matter. Sodomy is crime of the highest order, an abomination that threatens the moral fabric of our society. You must now determine whether the accused are guilty of this crime. Jury deliberated less than 10 minutes. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered the verdict. We find defendant Elias Hawthorne guilty of sodomy. Murmur ran through the courtroom. Some voices expressed satisfaction. Others sounded shocked, even though the outcome had been certain. We find slaves Malachi, Silas, and Darius guilty of sodomy and of corrupting their master. This verdict was delivered more quiet, almost as an afterthought. The three men's fate had never been in question. They were already dead in eyes of the law. The jury simply made it official. Judge Middleton nodded. Court accepts the verdict. We will proceed to sentencing. He paused, letting tension build. Every person leaned forward, waiting to hear what punishment would be decreed.
Elias Hawthorne, you have been found guilty of abominable crime of sodomy. Law permits me to sentence you to death, and many believe that would be appropriate punishment. However, I believe death would be too merciful. You have violated not just the law but sacred trust of your position, corrupted your slaves, abused authority, brought shame upon family and community. Elias closed eyes, waiting for sentence to continue. Therefore, I sentence you to 3 days of public punishment. You will be locked in the pillory in town square from dawn to dusk each day. At noon each day, you will receive 20 lashes with whip. You will be marked permanently, so for rest of your life you carry evidence of your crime upon your body, and you will witness the execution of 3 slaves whose lives you destroyed with your unnatural desires. Gasp went through the courtroom. 3 days in pillory was brutal enough, but 60 lashes total would leave man scarred and broken. Forcing Elias to watch executions was psychological torture many found excessive, even given severity of the crime. As for Malachi, Silas, and Darius, Judge continued, turning to face the 3 enslaved men, you are sentenced to death by hanging. The execution will take place in town square on the afternoon of the 3rd day of Elias Hawthorne's punishment, so he may witness the consequences of the corruption he brought upon you. Darius collapsed. Deputies caught him before he hit floor and held him upright. Silas's face remained impassive, but hands clenched into fists. Malachi looked directly at Elias for the first time since the trial began, and the expression on his face was not anger or fear. It was something worse. It was pity. Judge Middleton struck gavel. This court is adjourned. Sentence will be carried out beginning tomorrow at dawn. May God have mercy on all your souls. Courtroom erupted in conversation as people filed out. Some satisfied justice had been served, others disturbed by the severity. Many already planning to attend the public spectacle, drawn by morbid curiosity and knowledge they were about to witness something that had never happened in Beaufort before. Eliza left without looking at Elias. She had achieved what she set out to do. The truth was public. Elias was destroyed. She would soon be free to leave this place and never return.
Morning came too quick. Sun rose over Beaufort, casting golden light across town square. Already people were gathering, chairs set up for prominent citizens. Others stood in groups talking in low voices. Children were kept home, but teenagers and adults filled square until there was barely room to move. In center stood the pillory, wooden frame with holes for head and hands, and beside it, whipping post, thick wooden pole with iron rings for securing condemned. Both had been freshly painted, as if someone wanted them to look their best for this historic occasion. At dawn, Elias was brought from jail. He wore only trousers, torso bare, feet without shoes, hands bound behind back. Deputies led him to pillory and locked him in position, head and hands secured, body bent forward, completely immobilized. Morning sun was already hot. Within an hour, Elias was sweating. Within 2 hours, flies had found him. Within 3 hours, his back was burning from sun exposure and legs shaking from the strain of standing in one position. And people watched.
Some jeered and called insults, others simply stared in silence. Few felt pity but kept it to themselves. No one expressing sympathy for a sodomite would bring suspicion on their own character. Eliza arrived mid-morning, accompanied by 2 female relatives from Charleston who had come to support her. She stood a distance from the pillory, not close enough to speak to Elias, but close enough that he could see her if he raised eyes. She wanted him to know she was there, witnessing his humiliation, ensuring it was complete. Malachi, Silas, and Darius had been brought from jail and forced to stand at square's edge, chained together, guarded by deputies. They watched Elias's punishment with varying reactions. Malachi kept expression neutral, showing nothing. Silas watched with grim satisfaction, glad to see man who used him now suffering. Darius could not watch at all. He kept eyes on the ground, unable to bear the sight. At noon, the real punishment began. Sheriff Dunwoody approached the pillory with a long leather whip. The crowd fell silent, every eye fixed on the scene about to unfold. Elias Hawthorne, sheriff announced loud enough for everyone to hear. You have been sentenced to 20 lashes. May this punishment serve as a reminder of the consequences of your crime, and as a warning to any other man who might be tempted to follow your path.
Elias's body tensed. He had been whipped once as a child, few strokes for childhood mischief, but that had been nothing compared to what was coming. He tried to prepare himself, but there was no preparing for this. First lash came without further warning. Leather strip cut across Elias's bare back with a crack that echoed across square. Elias gasped but did not cry out. Thin line of red appeared on his skin. Second lash followed quick, then third. By 5th lash, Elias was groaning with each blow. By 10th, he was crying out, unable to maintain composure. By 15th, he was sobbing, body shaking with each impact. Skin on back was torn in multiple places, blood running down to soak into waistband of trousers. 20th lash finally came. Elias sagged in pillory, held upright only by the wooden frame imprisoning him. The crowd was silent now, the initial excitement of witnessing the punishment replaced by an uncomfortable reality of watching a human being broken. Sheriff Dunwoody coiled a whip and stepped back. Elias would remain in pillory until sunset, still exposed, still suffering. But at least the whipping was over for today. He drifted in and out of consciousness as the afternoon stretched in endless. People came and went, some staying hours, others just passing through to see the spectacle with own eyes. Finally, as the sun approached horizon, Sheriff Dunwoody returned. He unlocked the pillory, and Elias collapsed immediate, unable to stand. Deputies caught him, dragged him back to jail where a doctor had been ordered to examine him and ensure he would survive to endure the next 2 days. Second day began exactly like first. Elias brought out at dawn, locked in pillory, exposed to sun and insects and jeers of the crowd. His back was a mass of scabbed lacerations from previous days' whipping. Every movement pulled at the wounds, sending fresh waves of pain through body. Eliza returned as she had day before. She stood in a black dress, face shaded by a parasol, watching without expression. People had begun whispering about her, calling her cruel, calling her vindictive, but they also understood her rage. She had been wronged in a way few women could imagine. At noon, the whipping began again. 20 more lashes across Elias's already damaged back. This time he screamed from the first blow.
There was no dignity left, no strength to maintain composure. He screamed and begged and pleaded for mercy, but none came. Law had decreed 20 lashes, and 20 lashes he received. When it was over, Elias's back looked like raw meat. Doctor would later comment he had never seen man whipped so severely survive. But Elias did survive, though there were moments when he wished he had not. Third day arrived. Elias was brought to pillory for final time. His body was barely recognizable. Back covered in blood-soaked bandages, face swollen from sun exposure and insect bites. Legs could barely support weight, but sentence was clear. 3 days in pillory, 3 sessions of whipping. Law would be fulfilled. Crowd that day was largest yet.
Word had spread throughout county. People had traveled from neighboring towns to witness conclusion of Elias Hawthorne's punishment and execution of 3 slaves. Square was so packed that deputies had to form perimeter to keep crowd from pressing too close to pillory and gallows that had been erected overnight. Gallows were simple but effective wooden platform with 3 nooses hanging from the crossbeam. They had been positioned so Elias, locked in pillory, would have a clear view of the executions. This was Eliza's final gift to her husband, knowledge that his desires had directly caused these men's deaths, an obligation to watch as they died. Final 20 lashes came at noon. Elias barely reacted this time. He was beyond screaming, beyond begging. He simply endured, body jerking with each impact, blood flowing freely from reopened wounds. When whipping ended, he hung limply in pillory, more dead than alive. But he was conscious. That was important. Doctor had been instructed to keep him conscious no matter what, because he needed to witness what came next. At 2 in the afternoon, Malachi, Silas, and Darius were brought from jail. They walked through the crowd, chains clanking with each step. People fell silent as 3 men climbed the steps to the gallows platform. Minister, Reverend Cartwright, stood on the platform waiting.
He held the Bible and attempted to offer final prayers, but Darius interrupted him. "Save your prayers, Reverend," Darius said, voice surprisingly strong despite fear. "We do not need prayers from God who allowed this to happen. If there is God who sees what is happening here today and does nothing to stop it, then that God is no God at all." Reverend recoiled as if struck. "You blaspheme in your final moments?" "I speak truth in my final moments," Darius replied, "something no one in this town seems capable of doing." Silas spoke next, looking out at crowd. "You call us criminals, you call us corrupters, but we never had choice. When our master called us, we came. That is what slaves do. We survive however we can. And now you kill us to protect your own sense of order. Remember that. Remember what you did here today." Malachi said nothing. He simply looked at Elias, still locked in pillory 20 feet away. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and something passed between them, some final acknowledgement of strange and terrible relationship they had shared. Executioner, man named John Kelly, who served as the county's designated hangman, placed nooses around each man's neck. He adjusted them careful, ensuring they would work as intended, then stepped back and waited for a signal from Judge Middleton, who stood at the base of the gallows. Judge looked at a pocket watch. At exactly 2:15, he nodded. The executioner pulled the lever. Trap doors beneath Malachi, Silas, and Darius opened simultaneous. 3 men dropped, ropes went taut, and necks broke with audible cracks that carried across the silent square. They died quick, at least. That was the only mercy afforded them. Bodies swung gentle in the afternoon breeze. 3 men who had been property in life and remained property, even in death. Elias watched it all. He watched Malachi die. He watched Silas die. He watched Darius die. And something inside him broke that no amount of physical punishment could have broken. He made a sound, low, wailing cry that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside a shattered soul, a sound of anguish and despair and guilt that would haunt everyone who heard it for the rest of their lives.
Bodies were left hanging for hours, as was customary to ensure death was complete and serve as final warning. Then they were cut down and loaded into wagons. They'd be buried in unmarked graves on edge of town, in section reserved for criminals and slaves who died without family to claim them. Elias was finally released from pillory at sunset. He collapsed immediate, had to be carried back to jail. Doctor examined him and declared he would survive, though recovery would be long and painful. Judge Middleton came to Elias's cell that evening. He looked down at a broken man lying barely conscious, covered in bandages, spirit as damaged as body. "Mr. Hawthorne, you have served your sentence. You are free to go."
But understand this, you are no longer welcome in Beaufort, no longer welcome anywhere in South Carolina. If you remain here, if you attempt to reclaim your property or position, you will find society has closed its doors permanent. My advice is to leave, go west, go north, go anywhere but here, and pray no one where you land ever learns your name or history. Elias said nothing. There was nothing to say. His life as he had known it was over. Everything he had been, everything he had worked for was gone. He was ghost now, living reminder of what happened to men who violated unwritten rules of Southern society. 3 days later, after enough recovery that he could stand and walk with assistance, Elias left Beaufort. He took nothing but clothes on his back and small amount of money court had allowed him to keep from sale of possessions. Magnolia Shade Plantation was sold at auction to pay debts. Enslaved people, including Malachi's wife Rachel, were sold separately to various buyers throughout the region. The house was purchased by a family from Charleston, who renamed it and tried to erase all connection to Hawthorne name. Elias disappeared into the vastness of America. Some said he went to Texas. Others claimed he died within a year, unable to survive without privilege and protection he had always known. Few whispered he went to California during Gold Rush, lost himself among thousands of other men running from their pasts. But no one knew for certain. Elias Hawthorne simply ceased to exist, as thoroughly as if he had been executed alongside Malachi, Silas, and Darius. Eliza returned to Charleston as she had planned.
She resumed a maiden name, Pennington, and told everyone her husband had died. In sense, this was true. Man she had married no longer existed. Her family welcomed her back, sympathetic to ordeal, understanding she had been innocent victim of monstrous deception. She never remarried. She lived quiet, managing the inheritance, attending church, maintaining the appearance of respectable widow. But people who knew her said something had changed in her eyes, something hard and cold that had not been there before. She had destroyed her husband complete, and in doing so perhaps destroyed something in herself as well. Years passed. The scandal of Magnolia Shade Plantation faded from immediate memory, though it remained a cautionary tale whispered to young men about consequences of unnatural vice. County documents remained sealed as Judge Middleton had ordered, protecting the reputations of families involved. But in 1897, 54 years after events occurred, something unexpected happened. Young historian named Thomas Bradford, researching antebellum South Carolina for his doctoral thesis, applied for access to sealed county records. After considerable debate, Judge granted permission, reasoning that enough time had passed, that everyone directly involved was long dead, that history deserved truth. Bradford spent 3 months reading through documents, trial transcripts, Eliza's testimony, letters between judge and various officials, eyewitness accounts of punishment and executions, medical reports on Elias's condition, financial records of plantation sale. Everything had been meticulously preserved. Bradford was shocked by what he discovered, not just by the events themselves, though those were disturbing enough, but by what documents revealed about antebellum society, rigid moral codes enforced through spectacular public violence, laws that made no distinction between willing participants and enslaved people who had no choice, communities' eagerness to witness suffering, to participate in the destruction of one of their own when he violated social order. He published his findings in 1899 in academic journal with limited circulation. Article caused minor controversy among historians, but was largely ignored by the general public. Story was too old, too disturbing, too at odds with romantic myths about the Old South that were being promoted in that era. Then in 1923, 80 years after scandal, Beaufort County finally opened all sealed documents to the public.
A local newspaper ran a brief article about the Hawthorne case, presenting it as an interesting historical curiosity. Article mentioned that Eliza Pennington had lived until 1920, dying at age 87 in Charleston. That Elias Hawthorne's ultimate fate remained unknown, that descendants of Malachi, Silas, and Darius's families still lived in the region, though most had never known the full story of how their ancestors died.
Article concluded with observation that seemed to miss entire point. It was a different time, with different standards of morality and justice. We can only be grateful that we live in more enlightened era. But was it really so different? That was the question that haunted few people who truly understood story. Laws had changed, yes. Public executions were no longer permitted. Torture was no longer legal punishment. But human capacity for cruelty in service of maintaining social order, for using law to destroy those who threatened established hierarchies, for creating scapegoats and demanding blood sacrifices to appease collective fear and rage. Had any of that truly changed? In 2015, a small historical society in Beaufort erected a marker near site where the gallows had stood in 1843. Marker acknowledged that 3 enslaved men, Malachi, Silas, and Darius, last names unknown, had been executed on this spot for crimes that modern understanding recognized they could not have refused to commit. Marker called it injustice, called it tragedy, called it reminder of laws and social systems that valued property rights over human dignity. Marker said nothing about Elias Hawthorne, nothing about Eliza, nothing about 3 days in pillory or 60 lashes that left permanent scars. That part of story remained too uncomfortable, too complex, too resistant to simple moral lessons about past injustices. Because Elias was both perpetrator and victim. He had used his power to coerce enslaved men into sexual relationships, making him abuser regardless of his own desires. But he had also been destroyed by society that gave him no way to exist as who he truly was, forcing him to hide, to lie, to create secret room where he could be authentic for few stolen hours. Eliza was both victim and perpetrator. She had been genuinely wronged, trapped in a loveless marriage, subjected to years of humiliation and judgment. But she had also orchestrated a punishment of extraordinary cruelty, ensuring not just Elias's physical destruction, but his psychological and spiritual annihilation. Malachi, Silas, and Darius were purest victims in the story. Men who had no choices, no power, no voice, who were used and then executed to maintain a social order they had no role in creating. Their deaths were legal murder, sanctioned by courts and witnessed by hundreds who convinced themselves they were upholding justice and morality. And crowd 347 citizens who gathered in Beaufort Town Square over 3 August days in 1843. Who watched a man being tortured and 3 men being hanged, who brought their families to witness, who jeered and threw things and called it righteousness. What were they? Were they monsters? Or were they ordinary people who had been taught that maintaining social order required spectacular violence, that some lives were worth less than others, that public suffering served a higher purpose? These questions have no easy answers. History rarely does. What happened at Magnolia Shade Plantation and in Beaufort Town Square was not an aberration. It was logical extension of laws and social systems that existed throughout the antebellum South, throughout America, throughout human societies that build themselves on hierarchies of power and enforce those hierarchies through violence. Story remains disturbing, not because it is so different from our world, but because it reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature, about how quick compassion disappears when we are told that cruelty serves justice, about how easily we convince ourselves that destroying others protects our own safety and virtue. Elias Hawthorne, Eliza Pennington, Malachi, Silas, Darius, Judge Middleton, Sheriff Dunwoody, Reverend Cartwright, and 347 witnesses are all dead now. Their world is gone. But the echoes of what they did, choices they made, violence they perpetrated or witnessed or endured, those echoes remain. Listen careful, and you can still hear them. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or are there still secrets buried in Beaufort's past? Leave your comment below.
If you enjoyed this dark tale from American history and want more stories like this, subscribe to Forgotten Liturgy. Hit that notification bell and share with someone who loves historical mysteries. See you in the next video, where we will uncover another forgotten nightmare from America's past.